Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The headlights pierced the night like a blade, cutting through the darkness, blinding Officer Mark Harrison as he stood by his patrol car. He squinted against the glare, his heartbeat quickening as the old truck rolled toward him with unnerving speed. The street was desolate, empty, except for the scattered debris from a storm the night before. He'd been on patrol for the last 3 hours, and in that time, not a single car had passed through the area. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. Mark had been used to quiet nights like these, nights when the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing ever did. He was a small-town cop, the kind that handled traffic stops, minor disturbances, and the occasional drifter. Nothing ever prepared him for the moment that truck appeared, uninvited and unexpected. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Something was off. He didn't know what it was, but the feeling was impossible to ignore. His hand tightened around the flashlight as he took a step toward the vehicle. The truck was old, its rusted frame barely holding together, its headlights flickering erratically. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that belonged on these streets. It looked out of place, dirty, worn down, as though it had been traveling for days without rest. As the truck grew closer, Mark's senses sharpened. He could hear the faint rumble of the engine, but there was something almost unnatural about the sound. It didn't purr like a well-maintained vehicle. No, this engine was straining, struggling to stay alive. But still, it didn't stop. The truck came to a screeching halt just inches away from him, sending a rush of adrenaline through his body. He barely had time to react, instinctively stepping back as the heavy brakes squealed. His boots skidded slightly on the wet pavement, but he regained his footing quickly. He could feel his heart racing, his pulse thumping in his ears. The driver's side window slowly rolled down, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Mark squinted, trying to make out the figure behind the wheel. The air around them seemed to thicken, the night holding its breath, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Mark waited, his hand resting on his holster, his eyes locked on the shadowy figure in the driver's seat. The man didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge his presence. Mark took a slow, cautious step forward. "You lost, sir?" His voice was calm, professional, but the unease in his chest was growing. There was something about the stillness of the man, the way he sat in the truck, as though he were completely unaware of the world around him. That unsettled Mark. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity before the man finally spoke. His voice was low, quiet, but it carried an eerie weight to it. "You shouldn't have stopped me." The words hung in the air like a warning, an ominous declaration that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. He wasn't sure why, but something inside him told him that he'd just made a mistake he couldn't undo. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the man's hand shot out of the truck, grabbing the gear shift. Without another word, the truck slammed into reverse with a sickening screech, tires spinning wildly on the wet asphalt. Mark stumbled back in surprise, watching as the vehicle shot backward at an unnatural speed. For a moment, the truck seemed to sway as it turned, its tires kicking up gravel and debris as it fishtailed. Mark's hand instinctively went to his radio, his mind racing. What the hell was going on? Who was this man? And why did it feel like something was about to go horribly wrong? Before he could make the call, the radio crackled to life with a sharp burst of static. "Attention all units. Military SUVs heading towards your location. Multiple vehicles. They'll be there in under an hour. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." Mark froze, his fingers still wrapped around the radio. Military. What were military vehicles doing in the middle of nowhere? And why were they headed? Straight for his location. He glanced over his shoulder, but the truck had already disappeared into the night, its taillights flickering in the distance like fading embers. He stood there, motionless, the weight of the situation sinking in. The truck, the man, the military convoy, none of it made sense, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just any ordinary night. Something bigger was unfolding, and he was caught right in the middle of it. The radio crackled again, a different voice now coming through, urgent and full of tension. "The truck, it's important. You need to follow it, now." Follow it? Mark's pulse raced as he looked down the empty road where the truck had vanished. He was alone here, miles from anyone. He'd been trained to handle traffic stops, to keep the peace, but this was something entirely different. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it wasn't safe to ignore it. His instincts screamed at him to stay put, to call for backup, to wait for the military vehicles that were already on their way. But that feeling, deep in his gut, told him that time was running out. If he didn't act now, whatever was happening would be out of his control. He gripped the radio tightly, his fingers trembling slightly. "I'm not following this. I need backup. This is bigger than me." But before he could finish the sentence, another voice, this time cold and sharp, came through the radio. "You'll follow it or you'll regret it." The tone of the voice left no room for argument. Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel it in his bones. This was no longer just a routine stop. This was something far more dangerous. He turned back to his patrol car, the headlights casting long shadows across the empty road. The truck had disappeared, but something about it, about the way the man had looked at him, the strange warning he had given, stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just opened a door to something much larger than he could comprehend. His heart was pounding in his chest as he slid into the driver's seat of his patrol car. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around, to head back to the station and wait for backup. But his hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. He couldn't ignore it. Not now. Headlights of the military convoy were growing nearer, their engine sounds unmistakable. Mark glanced at the rearview mirror, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the lights behind him approaching fast. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he knew one thing. Whatever it was bigger than anything he had ever dealt with before. And there was no turning back. With a final glance down the dark road, Mark slammed his foot on the gas and sped. After the truck, the clock was ticking, and every second that passed brought him closer to something he couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain: whatever came next, he was in it now, and there was no way out. Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the truck in front of him grew fainter in the distance. His headlights cut through the heavy fog that had settled over the road like a thick blanket, and every turn he made felt like it brought him deeper into the unknown. The radio crackled in his ear, but the static that followed made it impossible to make out the words. His mind raced as he kept his eyes focused on the winding road ahead. The convoy was closing in, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the trucks behind him weren't just military vehicles. They were something far more sinister. His hands gripped the wheel even tighter as he glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, watching the dark shapes of the military SUVs growing closer with every passing second. He should have called for backup. He should have stayed at the station, followed procedure. But something inside him, something deep and primal, told him that there was more to this than just a routine stop gone wrong. He couldn't explain it, but he had to follow the truck. Had to find out why it had been so important. The hum of the engine was the only sound inside his patrol car, and as the silence stretched on, Mark couldn't help but feel isolated. Out here in the middle of nowhere, there was no one to turn to. Just the road, the fog, and the impending threat he could feel getting closer with every second. He glanced down at the dashboard, his fingers brushing the radio again. But before he could speak, the voice on the other end cut in. "Officer Harrison, do you copy?" Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I copy. Stay alert. We've been tracking that truck for weeks. There's more to it than you think. The convoy's approaching fast, and we need you to get eyes on that vehicle. Do not engage the military vehicles. We'll be there shortly." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Weeks? They'd been tracking the truck for weeks? He had no idea what he had stumbled into, but the fact that they had been following it for that long made everything feel far more dangerous than he had originally thought. He tried to piece together what little he knew, but the pieces wouldn't fit. What was so important about this old truck? He flicked on his siren as a precaution, knowing it was likely unnecessary with the fog so thick, but something about this situation felt wrong in a way he couldn't put into words. The further he drove, the more he began to question his decision. Why hadn't he just waited for backup? Why had he gone against his instincts? The fog swirled around him, making it feel as though the world itself had closed in, trapping him in a never-ending maze of shadows. His headlights illuminated the path ahead, but the road seemed endless, stretching into the darkness like an uncharted wilderness. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The truck had disappeared into the night, but he hadn't given up on it yet. Not until he knew what was going on. Not until he had the answers. The sound of engines in the distance brought him back to reality. A low, rumbling growl in the fog. More military vehicles, and they were drawing closer. He glanced in the rearview mirror again. This time, the convoy wasn't just a few distant dots in the darkness. It was unmistakable. 3 SUVs, their headlights bright and blinding, were speeding toward him. Mark's stomach dropped. They were closing in, fast, and he was stuck right in the middle of it. He floored the gas pedal, his patrol car speeding forward in an attempt to catch up with the truck. But the military convoy was gaining ground. The air in the car was thick, every breath feeling heavier as the weight of the situation settled over him. The convoy was almost on top of him. If they passed him, he would be in their way. He'd be caught, trapped, unable to escape. His eyes flicked between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. The truck. It was just ahead, fading into the mist. He could almost see the shadow of it now. But the convoy, those dark, looming figures, were so close that it was hard to focus on anything else. He had to make a choice, and fast. Either he let the military convoy pass and risk being caught in the middle of something bigger than he could handle, or he took a gamble and followed the truck, hoping that whatever was happening would make sense once he got there. He chose the latter. Mark swerved onto the shoulder of the road, narrowly avoiding the edge of the cliff that dropped off into the valley below. His tires screeched against the gravel as he adjusted the steering wheel, keeping the car on course. The military convoy was so close now he could hear their engines roaring, but Mark didn't take his foot off the gas. His eyes were locked on the truck ahead. It was there, just barely visible through the fog, its rusty frame barely discernible in the gloom. He was closing in. The question was, would he make it in time? A loud crash sounded behind him. Mark jerked his head toward the rearview mirror, just in time to see the first SUV in the convoy swerve dangerously, barely missing his patrol car as it veered off course. Mark's heart slammed against his chest as he tried to process what was happening. The military vehicles had just gone off the road. They were losing control, careening dangerously close to the cliffside. The second SUV tried to regain control, but it too fishtailed as it hit a patch of slick road, the headlights flashing wildly before it disappeared from view. Mark's mind raced. What the hell was going on? Why were they losing control? Was there something in the fog, some kind of interference, or was it the truck? He pressed the pedal down harder, pushing his patrol car faster. The truck was within reach now. He could see it clearer through the haze, its taillights flickering just a few 100 feet ahead. But the convoy? It was gone. The SUVs had disappeared into the fog. They were no longer a threat, at least not for now. The eerie silence that followed was deafening. Mark's breath came in shallow gasps as he navigated the winding road, his eyes fixed on the truck ahead. Something didn't feel right. The entire situation was spiraling out of control. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew this wasn't just a case of simple road rage or a fugitive on the run. There was something much bigger going on. As he closed the gap between him and the truck, Mark's radio crackled again. The voice on the other end was hurried, almost frantic. "Officer Harrison, do you copy? Do not engage the truck. Repeat, do not engage." Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was it. He was on his own now. The convoy had vanished. The trucks no longer in sight. It was just him and the truck, and whatever secrets it held. He glanced at the truck's rear-view mirrors. There was still no sign of the driver. It was like the man had vanished, like he didn't even exist. But Mark knew he had to keep going. Whatever was coming next, whatever secrets this truck held, it was all part of something much bigger than he could have imagined. Mark adjusted his grip on the wheel, his knuckles turning white. He was close now, close enough to make out the faded paint on the side of the truck. The words were barely legible, but they were there. And as he squinted, the letters slowly began to form a message. It was a name Mark knew, a name that sent a chill down his spine. Project Arcturus. Mark's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as he stared at the faded lettering on the side of the truck. Project Arcturus. The words seemed to glow in the dim light of his headlights, as if they were searing themselves into his mind, leaving behind a chilling mark. His breath caught in his throat. The name didn't make sense. It couldn't. But it felt familiar, like something he should have known. Something he should have remembered, but couldn't quite place. He pushed the thought away. Now was not the time for questions. He was too deep into this to turn back, and he knew it. The truck was moving, at a steady pace now, its headlights cutting through the fog, and he had to stay focused. The convoy had disappeared into the mist, but Mark knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped, or worse, before they figured out he was still following the truck. He was already in over his head, and the worst part was, he didn't even know what the hell was going on. The road ahead twisted and turned, narrow and treacherous in places, but Mark kept his eyes locked on the taillights of the truck. Every so often he would glance at his rearview mirror, checking for any sign of the military SUVs, but it was as if they had vanished into the night. The convoy had been close, but now they were nowhere to be seen. The silence of the night was unnerving. All he could hear was the hum of his patrol car's engine and the faint sound of tires on wet pavement. The air inside the car felt thick, suffocating, and every second that passed seemed to weigh heavier on his shoulders. What was he doing here? Why hadn't he just called for backup, followed procedure, and let someone else deal with this mess? He couldn't answer that question. Not yet. Not until he knew what the truck was carrying, what Project Arcturus really was. The truck ahead made a sharp turn, and Mark followed without hesitation, his heart racing in his chest. He hadn't been expecting the turn. The road here was barely a dirt path, overgrown with trees that hung low, their branches brushing against the windshield. The fog seemed to cling to the trees like ghosts, swirling around the truck and his patrol car, blurring his vision. But he couldn't lose it now. Not when he was so close. Mark pressed down on the gas pedal, pushing his car faster, trying to keep up. The truck's taillights flickered, and for a moment Mark thought he saw something in the distance, a shape moving in the fog. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He blinked, uncertain if it had been real. The road ahead had narrowed, the trees closing in on both sides, and the air felt colder, heavier. He had to focus. Whatever it was, he couldn't afford distractions. Not now. Suddenly the truck ahead slowed, its brake lights flaring in the distance. Mark cursed under his breath and slammed his foot on the brake. He hadn't been expecting the sudden stop. His tires squealed as his patrol car slid on the slick pavement, the front of the vehicle jerking to the left. He managed to regain control, but only just. Mark's eyes darted back to the truck, now stopped in the middle of the road. The driver's side door creaked open, and a shadowy figure emerged from the cab. Mark's breath caught in his throat. As he watched the figure move with an eerie calmness, the man didn't seem to be in a hurry, didn't seem to care that someone was following him. Mark's mind raced. This was it, the moment he had been dreading and waiting for. The man knew. He was being followed. But what was he going to do about it? Mark was out here alone, with no backup, and the last thing he wanted was to make a wrong move. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach the situation. But then the decision was made for him. The man from the truck raised his hand and pointed directly at Mark's patrol car. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He felt exposed, vulnerable, trapped. He couldn't let this man control the situation, couldn't let him dictate what happened next. His hand hovered over his gun, but something inside him told him to hold off. If he drew his weapon now, he would escalate the situation into something he couldn't control. But the man in front of him wasn't done. He took a step forward, his gaze locked on Mark's, and his voice carried through the thick fog, low and steady. "You shouldn't have followed me," the man said, his voice sending a chill down Mark's spine. Mark's grip tightened on the wheel, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to process everything at once. This was the moment he had feared, the moment everything would either make sense or completely unravel. But the man didn't seem interested in fighting. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the trees, his figure melting into the fog. Mark hesitated, then shifted the car into park. His instincts screamed at him to follow, but something told him to stay put, to wait for backup. But he couldn't. He needed answers. He opened the door of his patrol car and stepped out. The cold night, air biting at his skin. His breath formed small clouds of vapor in the chilly air, but his focus remained on the man, who was now disappearing into the trees. Mark didn't think. He just reacted. He started walking toward the woods, his boots crunching on the gravel. As he moved quickly, his hand resting near his holster, ready for anything. The sound of his footsteps felt unnaturally loud in the quiet, and his eyes darted around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. It was too quiet, too still. As he neared the edge of the trees, the fog thickened, swallowing everything in its path. He could barely see more than a few feet ahead, and his mind began to play tricks on him. Was he hearing things? Was there something out there with him, moving just out of sight? And then, out of nowhere, the man reappeared. He was standing in front of Mark now, closer than before, his face still hidden in the shadows. Mark froze. "Do you know what Project Arcturus is?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Mark's skin crawl. Mark didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His mind was spinning, trying to grasp at any fragments of information that might explain the name, but nothing came to him. It was as if the words had been erased from his memory, deliberately. He felt as though he should know, but the knowledge just wasn't there. "No," Mark said, his voice steady but uncertain. "What is it?" The man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the dense fog. Mark took a step back instinctively, but he didn't run. He couldn't. Something about this situation felt like it was bigger than just the two of them. "It's not a project." "Not anymore," the man said, his eyes glinting with an eerie intensity. "It's a warning." Mark's stomach twisted. He didn't understand. What was this man trying to tell him? What was Project Arcturus really? The man's face finally came into view, and Mark could see the deep lines of age etched into his skin, the exhaustion in his eyes. The man looked like he had seen too much, like he had lived through things that should never have been seen by anyone. His eyes bore into Mark's, and for a brief moment, Mark felt a sense of clarity. This is bigger than you think, officer. Harrison, the man continued, what you're involved in now, it's only the beginning. Mark felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead as the words sank in. Only the beginning. What had he gotten himself into? The man was talking as though the future was already written, as though everything that was about to happen had already been set in motion long before Mark ever stopped that truck. He wanted to ask more, but the man didn't give him a chance. With one final lingering glance, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his footsteps fading into the night. Mark stood there, frozen, the weight of the man's words heavy in his chest. Everything was about to change. He knew it, and whatever it was, whatever Project Arcturus was, it was coming for him. The cold night air stung Mark's face as he stood there, motionless in the fog. He could feel the weight of the man's words pressing down on him, suffocating him. The man's warning echoed in his mind like a siren, louder with each passing second. This is bigger than you think, Officer Harrison. What you're involved in now, it's only the beginning. The trees loomed over him, dark and unyielding, the fog swirling between their trunks like ghosts in the night. Mark's pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he was looking for were just beyond his reach, hidden in the shadows of the woods. But what could he do? The man had vanished without a trace, and Mark was alone, standing at the edge of a cliff. Unsure of where to go next, his breath came in shallow gasps as his mind raced. He needed answers, but he didn't even know where to start looking. The name Project Arcturus burned in his mind, but it meant nothing to him. It was like a key to a door he didn't have the combination for. The fog seemed to close in. Around him, the world shrinking. And for a moment, Mark wasn't sure if he was still awake or trapped in some kind of nightmare. He turned toward his patrol car, but the familiar, comforting sight of it only made him feel more isolated. He had crossed a line, one he couldn't come back from. Whatever this was, it was too big for him to handle alone. Mark glanced back toward the woods. The truck had disappeared, and with it, the man. But the words they had spoken hung in the air, like a threat that was waiting to be fulfilled. A noise broke through the silence, sharp and unnerving. The unmistakable sound of an engine. Mark's head snapped toward the direction of the noise. The military convoy? The trucks? No, this was different. This was something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Mark turned quickly and started running toward the sound, his heart racing as he forced his legs to move faster. The fog seemed to fight against him, clinging to his body, making it harder to breathe, harder to see. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop now. As he neared a small clearing, he saw it. The headlights of a vehicle, flickering, like distant stars in the fog. But it wasn't a military vehicle. It wasn't anything he had ever seen before. The truck was sleek, dark, and ominous, like something out of a science fiction movie. It was parked just at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the mist, and for a moment Mark wasn't sure if it was real or if his mind had finally broken under the pressure. But then the door opened. A man stepped out, wearing a black suit, his face hidden in shadow. Mark's hand instinctively went to his holster, his fingers brushing against his gun. But the man didn't move in a threatening manner. He stood there, watching Mark, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Officer Harrison," the man said, his voice cold and smooth, as if it was a name he had said 1,000 times before. Mark froze. "Who the hell are you?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were being sized up, examined, like you were a puzzle waiting to be solved. The man took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate. "I'm someone who can help you," he said. But first, you need to understand what you're dealing with." Mark's breath hitched. "What is this? What's going on?" The man's eyes gleamed with a strange light, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "What you're involved in, Officer Harrison, is something that's been years in the making. a project, an experiment, something that started long before you were ever born. Project Arcturus is not just a name, it's a symbol of power, of control, of the future. Mark's mind reeled. He had no idea what the man was talking about, but the way he said it, the way he looked at him, Mark could feel the truth, the terrifying weight of it deep in his bones. Project Arcturus, the man continued, was designed to change everything. It's not about technology or military power. It's about human evolution, about controlling the very core of humanity. Mark took a step back. His heart was pounding in his chest now, and the world around him seemed to spin. What does that have to do with me? Why am I involved? The man's smile faded, and he stepped closer, his voice growing more serious. You're not just anyone, Officer Harrison. You're a key, a piece of the puzzle that we've been assembling for years. The truck you've been following, the convoy that's been tailing you, none of it is coincidence. It's all been orchestrated. Mark's mind was racing. He couldn't keep up with the man's words. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. But as he looked into the man's cold, calculating eyes, he knew it was. He had stepped into something far bigger than himself, and there was no way out. What do you want from me? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression softened, but only slightly. We need you to understand. The world as you know it is changing, and you are going to be a part of that change. You've already seen too much to walk away now. Mark's knees felt weak. The weight of the man's words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had no choice. Whatever this was, whatever Project Arcturus was, it was happening, and he was in the middle of it. The man seemed to sense Mark's hesitation. You've already crossed the line, officer. There's no going back now, but you still have a choice. You can help us, or you can stand in our way, but either way, the outcome will be the same. Mark felt a surge of fear, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of hope, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined, and now he had the chance to be a part of it. The chance to be someone who could change the world. I'll help you, Mark said, his voice firm now, the uncertainty that had plagued him earlier fading away. He didn't know what he was agreeing to, but he knew one thing: he couldn't. Walk away, not anymore. The man nodded slowly, his eyes studying Mark closely, as though measuring his every word. Good. You're not alone in this, Officer Harrison. There are others like you, others who have already made their choice. Together, we can change everything. The man turned, his dark figure swallowed up by the fog. Come, he said, his voice beckoning Mark forward. It's time to take the next step. Mark followed, his heart racing, but this time it was different. The fear had transformed into something else, a realization that whatever was about to happen, it was out of his hands. The world was changing, and whether he liked it or not, he was going to be part of it. The man opened the door to the dark truck, and Mark stepped inside, the world outside fading into the mist. The last thing Mark saw before the door slammed shut was the fog, thick and suffocating, hiding everything and everyone from view. And then there was nothing.